Solo: A Star Wars Story was a fun movie. It ultimately ended up being a typical summer blockbuster movie, just a fun summer action movie. The problem is that is not what Star Wars is. Solo should not simply be another summer action movie. It needs to be something more. And if it has any reason for existing, it needs to add something to the Star Wars legacy. No Star Wars work should ever be allowed to get along just by the name alone, Star Wars, and it needs to add something to the universe. And fans can't just be expected to accept any mediocre product just because it bears the name Star Wars in its title. I'll be honest, I had no intention whatsoever of doing this movie. Many of you have probably seen my sequel trilogy rewrite, which is what kinda, I guess, spurred the liking for this, but enough comments were saying that I should rewrite Solo, and I'm not one to let down any of my subscribers. However, unlike the sequel trilogy, which has ultimately very little build-up and it leaves the ending completely open-ended, this, however, takes place in the middle of the Star Wars saga, which means that I have things both before and after the events of Solo: A Star Wars Story to take into account. I can't simply have Vader show up and fight Han Solo because that wouldn't make sense for the rest of the movies. Now, before I start, I need to also say that any comic books that lead into or books that lead into Solo: A Star Wars Story and tie in any way will be discarded entirely, as all of these kinda lock you into the plot of Solo: A Star Wars Story. My goal is to not contradict the movies. That is my only goal. So books that feature Lando Calrissian and L3, as well as comic book series like Imperial Cadet, which was the prequel to Solo: A Star Wars Story, will inevitably be discarded from the canon entirely in lieu of a more streamlined and, I think, at least in my opinion, a better movie in general. So without any further ado, let's get started. This is my version of Solo: A Star Wars Story. Now, the plot of Solo: A Star Wars Story restarts 4 times, and it isn't until the actual second act of the movie that the actual plot of the movie begins in the heist to go and steal the coaxium. There's the opening on Corellia, then we move to Mimban, and then we move to Vandor, and then finally, after talking with Dryden Voss, we actually begin the actual plot of the movie whenever we go and talk to Lando and begin the planning for stealing the coaxium. That's 4 beginnings of the movie before the movie actually starts rolling. When a third of the movie is spent starting the movie, you know that your movie actually has a problem, so we're actually going to roll it back and actually start with a clear-cut beginning to the movie. We're going to have a cold open as TIE fighters screech across the sky. We're going to move into one of the TIE fighters and we will see Han Solo. Now obviously he'll have his helmet on, so there's no way to actually know that it's Han Solo, but it will be indicated by his trooper number. We're above the planet of Naboo as TIE fighters are screeching across the sky, picking apart the Naboo air defense fleet. As N1 starfighters streak across the sky, blowing up and getting blown up by TIE fighters, we will see a formation of fighters moving in with Han Solo as part of the outside wing. His commander will tell him to stay in formation. Han Solo will notice a few stray fighters moving off to the right, and so he will move off as well to pick them off. His commander will repeatedly yell into his comm that he needs to stay in formation, which he will simply say, "I've got this." Out of nowhere, a VCX-100 light freighter is going to rip into frame, blasting apart several TIE fighters and aiding with the N1 starfighters. Han's commander is going to repeatedly tell him that he needs to break off and fall back into formation with the rest of his TIE wing. However, he will not do so, which will ultimately lead to the VCX-100 blowing his ship up. We will then cut to back inside his TIE cockpit, where a red light will come on and an alarm will sound, as the top of the cockpit opens up, leading to a simulation center. As he gets out, his commander will reprimand him. Yurub Nakan, Han Solo's CO from the comic book series Imperial Cadet, will be there to reprimand him, telling him that he shouldn't have broken off. When Han Solo says that the VCX was never supposed to be part of the simulation, his CO will say that if he had simply followed orders and stayed in formation, then the VCX would not have been a problem, and they would have been able to take it out as part of a collective. Moving on to say that he's far too independent, that he needs to remain part of the collective because he is a part of the Empire. No one name gets glory. If there is an actual victory, it belongs to the Emperor. The TIE Wing and any branch of the Imperial Navy only serves to better the Empire, and thus the credit goes to the Empire. Therefore, no true victory can ever actually be attributed to one single soldier. Nakan will go on to say that there are several of these rebel cells, as they are called, and that this particular model of Corellian freighter has shown up multiple times and been a disruption to Imperial trade routes, which is why it warranted being included inside the simulation without the knowledge of any cadet. Obviously, we as longtime Star Wars fans, or maybe just those who actually watch the show, will recognize this ship as the Ghost from Star Wars Rebels. Nakan will tell Cadet Solo that he is being removed from the TIE wing and that he's being moved to a Gazanti-class light cruiser, saying that perhaps him flying in a cruiser will help better temper him so that he can actually prove himself to be a part of an actual TIE contingent. He'll tell everyone that training is over, they need to suit up and get ready because they're heading to Mimban. Han Solo will ask why, and he says that's a question for an actual TIE pilot, not a cruiser pilot. In the background, and almost completely out of frame, we're going to see Beckett and Val in their Imperial disguises talking amongst themselves. Now this is going to be a simple shot that honestly most people aren't going to pick up on their first viewing, but we'll see it in the background on your second viewing and be like, oh okay, these are those guys. Rio is not going to be a part of this group. Unfortunately, it was just needed for the actual plot of this movie to go on. It was just a pointless death in the first act to kind of establish that, oh hey, we mean business, but it was really just to clear the road for Kira and Lando. Kira will also not be in this movie. She's just a discount Leia. Neither will any of the stuff that actually happens on Corellia. As I've said, a lot of the movie, in the beginning of the movie, especially in the first act, is just used to pad the runtime and also kind of move the plot along, but a lot of this can be taken out with a few simple scenes added in instead. We can get to the action and the desertion much quicker if we just skip the beginning part and show him in as an Imperial cadet, which is part of the movie that I think a lot of people wanted more, and it's certainly the reason why Disney and Marvel released Imperial Cadet, the comic book series. Next, we will see a Gazanti-class cruiser jumping out of hyperspace into the Mimban system. It's also worth noting that the title cards that we saw in Rogue One will also feature here. I think if it's important that one thing is established in a spin-off movie, then it should continue on to the other spin-off movies. So every planet that we see, every major location, will also have a title card, the same that we see in Rogue One, A Star Wars Story. Commanding the vessel will be Beckett. Again, at this point, we do not know that he has an ulterior motive and that he is actually not an Imperial. He is snuck on board, through some kind of means, talking to another officer like, I have control of this ship, and a lesser officer would just be like, okay, because it's the Empire. They're not going to question who someone is, they're going to look at the rank, they're going to see who they are, and they're going to be like, alright, I'm not going to question this guy. Han is going to be one of the pilots of this ship, with Val taking over as the second position, though she is going to also be in an officer's uniform, which is going to throw Han off because obviously this is not customary. Over Mimban, the Mimbanese air defense fleet is going to be in heavy engagement with the Empire. We'll see a few light cruisers and Gazantis, nothing really major, nothing really signifying that this is a major engagement, so no Imperial Star Destroyers are actually going to be present in this battle. The Gazanti is going to be rocked by a cruise missile, knocking unconscious several of the pilots. Han will tell the pilots that they need to get to their fighters quickly and get down to the surface so that they can help defend the troops on the ground inside the atmosphere. Han will then scoff to himself that with only 2 fighters it's not much help this ship is going to do, to which Beckett will look at him and says, if you genuinely think that you need to be in that fighter, you're a pilot and you're trained, you should get inside that TIE. Now again, later this is going to be seen as a simple ploy to gain control of a ship and jettison out of the system. However, to Han, he's simply seeing a superior officer acknowledging his worth and allowing him the opportunity to fly. Han will then get inside one of the available TIE fighters and fly down, joining a part of the wing contingent. Several people will notice like, hey, why is Solo a part of this mission? I thought he was taken off of this TIE wing. Han Solo will fly as he does, he'll take out several Mimbanese air support craft, and ultimately he's going to stray from the group, looking for glory as he did in the opening scene. He'll prove himself effective in taking out multiple ships, though he will eventually clip wings with someone flying in formation, refusing to get out of the way, as they are of course in formation and aren't really designed, I suppose, to think independently. No Imperial cadet, that is, or Imperial pilot. After multiple shots and Han trying to regain control of the TIE fighter, he will scoff at how weak and cheaply the thing was made before he crashes into the ground. Troopers will be there to pull him out, to which a commander will say that he needs to be taken to the brig. He has stolen a fighter and destroyed property of the Empire. Han will protest, saying that he actually had authorization from a superior officer. When the commander on the ground asks who, he'll say, I don't know, some captain. To which the commander will then look up on his datapad and notice that there was no captain assigned to the Gazanti-class cruiser that he was on, and to throw him in the brig. Now, this isn't going to be the same brig scene that we saw before with Chewie and him rolling around in the mud. Rather, they're going to actually see each other across with the ray shields up. It's going to be actual cells, to which Han will simply scoff, "What is a Wookiee doing all the way on Mimban?" To which Chewie will just growl, and Han will say, "Hold on, I actually think I know a little bit." But he's not going to actually speak Wookiees or whatever the actual language is. He's just going to talk basic, and Chewie's going to speak back in Wookiee, and they're going to be able to understand each other. After a while, they'll see Beckett and Val walking through, saying, "I knew we shouldn't have taken that cruiser after it was shot. The thing would never have actually been space-worthy." Beckett will tell Val to calm down, as they can easily find another craft somewhere on this planet to get off-world. They'll then stop and look at Han and say, "Well, we do need a pilot." And then Han is going to scoff and say, "I knew it. There's no way that there would actually be 2 officers of that rank on a simple Gazanti." Beckett will crack his kind of smirk and say, "You're perceptive, kid. Look at where it landed you." Han will say, "Well, if you need a pilot, I'm a pilot. I've been trying to get out of this rotten hole for a long time. You need me." The same general conversation that took place on the AT hauler in the actual theatrical cut of the movie will take place here. Val will say, "We need a pilot. We can't do this without one." So they'll say, "All right, kids, stand back." And Beckett will shoot the control panel, releasing the ray shield and letting him go. Han will then look forward and say, "Bring the Wookiee." At which point they'll say, "Why the Wookiee?" And he'll be like, "This isn't his home planet, this isn't what he's meant to be here for. Let him come with us, he might prove useful." To which Beckett will begrudgingly agree and take him with him. They'll then go on to an AT hauler and fly off-world, with Han as the pilot. Now, this process of events actually does several things. We cut out the Corellia scene in the beginning, so we're saving ourselves from one beginning of the movie. We're cutting out the scene on Vandor with the train, because that scene already happened behind the scenes. That happened in the background with Val and Beckett, so we're cutting that out entirely. So we're effectively just starting with Imperial Han Solo and moving the plot along as it did in the beginning. Han is going to ask Beckett where they need to go, to which he will say Tatooine. They are going to arrive at Jabba's palace, because let's admit it, Dryden Voss was kind of just dumb, alright? Like, let's get that out of the way. If you're going to be lazy and make a rip-off Jabba, you might as well just use Jabba. So in Jabba's palace, with Beckett, Val, Chewie, and Han, Jabba is going to come out and question Beckett, asking him why he failed on his mission. He'll say that he ran into an unforeseen complication with the ship that they boosted, and that ultimately their prey could actually get away, unfortunately. Beckett, of course, trying to smooth talk his way out of getting killed by Jabba the Hutt. It will then be revealed that they were going for a very expensive and rare fuel, coaxium, which is much more reactive and stronger than the more typical fuel of the Clone Wars era, rhydonium. He will look at Beckett, and Beckett will say, "Sorry, kid, I just needed a pilot to get me here. I didn't really know what to do with you once we got there," which is also going to establish that he's a bit more of a callous individual than he is earlier let on. As he lifts his hands to push the button, which will launch them down into the Rancor pit, Han Solo tells him to wait and stop, saying that he actually knows how they can get more coaxium. This is going to take him from more of a passive hero in the actual movie to more of an active hero, where his actions are going to affect the plot. Han will go on to say that they store coaxium on certain ships in the Imperial Navy, and that if he can get them onto an Imperial-class Star Destroyer, he knows where to go. Everyone in Jabba's throne room is going to laugh, saying that it's impossible to trespass your way onto an Imperial-class Star Destroyer, to which Han will say he's served on them and knows exactly where to go. All he needs is a ship to disguise them and get their way on, and he'll know exactly what to do. He'll say that if you spare us, we'll get you double what you were going to be promised originally by Beckett. Beckett is going to give him kind of a concerned but almost an impressed kind of look. Jabba will say that he'll let him do this, but he has 1 week to do so, also giving our heroes kind of a bit of a time crunch. As they're escorted from Jabba's palace, Beckett is going to say, "Well, we're going to need a ship," to which Han says, "Do you know where we can get a ship?" To which he'll say, "Yeah, I know a guy, but he's really not going to want to do it." This is of course setting up Lando. We all knew that he was going to have to be in this movie in some capacity, but in any event, we're going to cut back to Mimban. Admiral Nakan is going to be walking amongst the rubble, wondering what happened in the battle. The commanding officer there on the ground will simply say that the battle went perfectly well, the planet is now the property of the Empire. The only downside is they lost a single pilot. Nakan is going to grab the commanding officer and say, "Why did you lose a pilot?" And he'll simply say, "It's just a deserter, just one man. There's no need to bother ourselves over one man when the greater glory of the Empire lies at risk." Nakan will ridicule him, saying that one man deserting the Empire will lead to multiple, And if one person can poke a hole in the great tapestry that is the Empire and show even the slightest amount of weakness, it can topple from the ground up. He will then say that he will be dealing with this matter personally, track him down, and end him. What this does also adds something that Solo, a Star Wars story, never ultimately had, and that is an actual antagonist. Yes, we have Dryden Voss, but he is a very passive antagonist, only showing up in the beginning and the end of the movie. What we need is someone who can actually be a villain for our characters. And what he's going to do is tell the commanding officer to plot every course, every planet in the course of their last known trajectory, plotting a course through the galaxy and showing him what planet they likely landed on. Back on board the AT hauler, with Beckett and Han, Val and Chewie, they say that they need to plot a course for Nar Shaddaa. The reasoning for just this planet is I wanted to throw in something that has kind of a more prequel-esque. It's basically Coruscant, but instead of New York City, it's Las Vegas. If you're an old fan of the series, Knights of the Old Republic, you're very familiar with the planet itself, or really any other kind of Legends material, you know the planet Nar Shaddaa. As the ship jumps to hyperspace, a ship comes out of hyperspace, coming into Tatooine, where we will simply see him questioning locals and asking about certain people, to which they will eventually point their fingers to Jabba's palace. He'll then go in and question Jabba, saying that it would serve him well to tell him where they were headed. Nakan will say he has no quarrel whatsoever with the Hutt clan, but he does, however, have a quarrel with this one Imperial cadet. Jabba will scoff and say, "Why are you worried about just one Imperial cadet? Unless you're worried about any greater implications." To which point, Nakan will reach for his blaster. Jabba will say, "Watch yourself, Imperial. You might control the galaxy, but I still control Hutt space." Pondering to himself, he will then say, "They went to Nar Shaddaa to find a ship." You see, to Jabba, ultimately, this job means nothing. If he gets his fuel, that's great. If he doesn't get his fuel, he's right back where he was originally and was just going to kill them. So if this man does end up actually killing Han and gang, then it won't actually amount to anything because he's right back at square one. He'll just send another person out. But if they survive, then it will actually show Jabba that he has actually put his faith in the right people. On Nar Shaddaa, the scene that played out on Vandor is going to play out pretty much the same as it will here. You know, Han's gonna make a bet. He'll bet the VCX-100 that he doesn't have, but he got the name of the ship and the idea of the ship from the simulation, coming around full circle. Lando will agree to come and join the crew, provided he takes a larger cut than actually would be proportionate. So instead of getting 20%, he wants 50%, to which Beckett will argue down to about 30, and Lando will say he agrees. That kind of line, you know, I don't like it, I don't agree with it, but I accept it. As they're walking to the Millennium Falcon, or what will eventually be revealed to be the Millennium Falcon, we see an Imperial Star Destroyer above Nar Shaddaa. Beckett will scoff and say, "Friends of yours?" To which Lando will turn and say, "You're an Imperial?" And Han will simply say, "I was an Imperial." And then they'll begin to move on, running at a quicker pace towards their ship, catching the eye of some deployed stormtroopers. The stormtroopers will radio in, and ultimately this is going to end up leading to a chase. Some shots will be fired. It's just meant to be a little bit of action in the middle of the movie. There's really not anything consequential that's going to happen here. Multiple stormtroopers are eventually going to radio in, and Nakan is going to be there chasing them and meeting them. But before he's able to actually exchange any words, he throws a tracking beacon onto the Millennium Falcon, so to be able to track them through space, but without actually being able to exchange any words with Solo. As the Millennium Falcon leaves the atmosphere, we're gonna see Lando ask Beckett where they're going, at which point he'll look to Solo and be like, "Kid, where are we going?" He'll say that they need to get on board an Imperial Star Destroyer, at which point Lando will be like, "I did not sign up to hijack an Imperial cruiser." At which point Han is gonna say, "We can't simply go and dock with an Imperial Star Destroyer. We need a smaller ship of Imperial class that can disguise us and actually get us on board the vessel." At which point Val and Beckett will look at each other and say to them, "We need to go to Mimban," where they will then retrieve the broken but still operational Gazanti-class cruiser. They will fly it up out of the atmosphere, but as the ship doesn't actually have any hyperdrive, they're not going to be able to actually use the ship to go through hyperspace, so the Millennium Falcon will actually dock underneath it. The ship will then transmit in Imperial codes, which will actually allow them to get onto a Star Destroyer, though the Millennium Falcon is going to be the ship that is actually driving. and the Gazanti is basically dead in space, using just its basic computers to transmit the signal. Obviously, in a movie, this would be a little bit more elaborate. I would imagine that it would be more like kind of a stealth mission, like, oh, we need to go and get this wrecked cruiser and, get it up off the ground. But it wouldn't take too much time, and it wouldn't take away from the ultimate plot of the movie. They're going to ask Han Solo where they can find an Imperial Star Destroyer, at which point Han Solo will say, well, Imperial Star Destroyers are put over critical points in the galaxy, and anywhere where you find an Imperial Star Destroyer, you're ultimately going to find other craft, so we can't ever just find one on its own. However, they sometimes do patrol deep space in critical points on hyperspace lanes. So he says that they need to go to I don't know the exact name, but it's the nebula that was in the the third and fourth episodes of Star Wars The Clone Wars in Season 1. The one that had the Moray Mantis beings that can live in the vacuum of space. You know the one I'm talking about, hopefully. The one that you're seeing on the screen right now. It's not that hard to, put the pieces together. As the ship comes out of hyperspace around the nebula, they will see the Imperial-class Star Destroyer looming above them, at which point they will transmit codes to dock on the side of the ship. From there on, it's going to be a simple snatch and grab mission, at least that's what they think. It's going to be, again, mostly stealth, hiding under the radar, and shooting the few stormtroopers that come across their path. We're then going to cut back to Lando inside the cockpit of the Falcon, just kind of, doing his own thing, recording his own memoirs, but then suddenly another Star Destroyer is going to come out of hyperspace, at which points he will radio Beckett, Val, Chewie, and Han and say that they need to look out, we've got more company, there's a second Star Destroyer that just entered the system. Lando will say that he needs to detach and move to another area of safer location inside the nebula. He will then say that if they actually succeed, he will meet them inside the nebula and for an actual pickup, that they're going to have to steal a ship, to which Han says that shouldn't be a problem, I know how to fly pretty much everything in here. Chewie will then make a little kind of slight growl, at which point Beckett will say, you mean mostly? Shouldn't you know how to fly everything in here? At which point Han will say that he didn't exactly finish a lot of the flight stuff, and he wasn't allowed to fly a lot of the bigger ships. Cut to the bridge of the incoming Star Destroyer as Nakan radios the tower of the Star Destroyer right by the nebula, saying that they have a potential stowaway issue, and if they haven't seen any unsighted ships, that they need to open up their scanners more and broaden the range so that they can find any incoming vessels that might be under a cloaked signature. At which point, the Admiral on board of the other Star Destroyer is going to say that they had a Gazanti that was incoming and transmitted its codes for clearance, however it never actually docked, at least in the main hangar bay where it was actually supposed to, at which point the alarm will be raised, at which point Han and the gang's mission is actually going to be much more urgent. As Han Solo and the group eventually make their way to the hyperdrive, they are going to end up boosting some of the fuel. There's going to be a brief shootout and obviously some concern about, hey, we want to be careful, we don't need to actually strike the fuel, so it's going to kind of be like, hey, look at what we're holding, you hit us, this whole ship goes up in flames. To which point the stormtroopers are going to lower their weapons, they're going to slowly back their way out. As soon as the door closes, the other stormtroopers are going to radio their location, and the group is going to eventually bolt, making their way to the hangar. Nakan is going to say to prep his TIE fighter and that he's heading over to the other ship. As of course in the comic he was a TIE pilot himself, despite being an admiral, or at least having the insignia of an admiral. He's an admiral in this movie. He will be flying the TIE Bruiser that we actually see in Solo. The thing that was a marketing ploy that was made to sell more toys, but Solo didn't do well enough to warrant that, so it ended up just being left by the wayside. Well, the TIE Bruiser is going to be what he's going to be flying. Han Solo and crew will eventually make their way to the hangar bay where they spot a ship that can fit all of them, a TIE bomber. The extra crew will, of course, be in the bombing compartment, which we saw in Star Wars Rebels. It wasn't a very long scene, but we do see that they can actually fit in there, so that's going to be the ship that they're going to use. Val and Beckett are going to note that there's no way they're going to be able to fit in there with the bombs, as of course they're up on the catwalk and the ramparts. So Han Solo is going to say, oh, that's easy. Pushes a button and all the bombs in the ship actually drop out, landing in the hangar bay door and causing a massive explosion. Of course, it's enough of a drop where it doesn't actually damage the fighters, but it does call attention to where they are and exactly what they're trying to do in their escape. Han Solo and crew will eventually get in and eventually detach from the ship, leaving with a massive amount of TIE fighters following them. Nakan and his forces will spot the ships leaving the hangar bay and also move in as part of the TIE fighter wing in pursuit. They will attach themselves to the side of the Gazanti and then eventually on to the actual Millennium Falcon, where they will eventually go in and man the turrets and go into the cockpit and everything else. Now obviously L337 isn't a part here, so that's great. It's always good to not have a bad character. And they're going to attach, and this is going to take the place of pretty much the Kessel Run, but not a Kessel Run, because, again, not everything needs to be shown in Solo. Solo showed everything: how he got the ship, the Kessel Run, how he met Chewie, how he got his gun, his dice, and how important they were. It's not important to show everything. So the Kessel Run isn't going to be a part of this movie. Eventually, the Falcon will detach itself from the Gazanti, and it will fly around, doing pretty much the exact same thing that was happening before. As you've seen, there's going to be TIE Fighter fighting, and eventually Han Solo will take over piloting the Millennium Falcon, at which point Nakan will note exactly what's going on. Now, I don't want to have Nakan die in this scene, but because I would like to set him up for, hopefully, if this movie did well, which obviously I think I'm writing it, so I think it would do well, he would be set up as a villain for future movies, and maybe in these future movies we could see the Kessel Run. You get what I'm saying. We're not saving everything for this movie, or we're not putting everything in this movie, we're saving it for future movies. So essentially, Han Solo's going to get out, they're going to inject a bit of the fuel, the coaxium, into the hyperdrive, which will cause them to escape. And my idea for why that would be a necessity to use special hyperfuel to jumpstart their hyperspace trip is because eventually an interdictor would be called in, which would stop them from actually going into hyperspace usually. So only by injecting fuel directly into the hyperdrive would that cause enough power to break through the interdictor's gravity wells. So it's similar to the Kessel Run, but it's different in several ways. And again, I think that having this kind of core antagonist instead of look at Han go around and do some things actually adds to the movie itself. They're going to get back to Tatooine, at which point, Lando's going to say, look, I don't care what happens, you do what you got to do, deliver what you have to deliver, I'm out of here. Just, I'll bill you my portion. And then he's going to leave with the Millennium Falcon. At which point, the crew of 4, which is Val, Beckett, Chewie, and Han, are going to go into Jabba's palace, and they're just going to give him the fuel. This is just kind of a simple wrap-up. Jabba will say, you have some promise, how would you like to be one of my smugglers? Which is obviously where he ends up in Episode 4, at which point Han is going to say, yeah, sure, sounds like a good gig for now. But first, I'm going to need a ship. The movie's going to wrap up. Val and Beckett are going to say, if you ever need someone for a crew, or, if we ever need someone, it's just like, happy, like, we'll see each other again. It's kind of like winking at the camera. And, of course, the last scene where Han Solo eventually plays and he steals the card from Lando and eventually wins himself the Millennium Falcon, that scene is going to stay. That'll be the last scene in the movie where they fly off. So in many ways, this movie is similar to the actual theatrical cut, but in many ways it's different, especially with the overall plot, the inclusion of an actual antagonist, the idea of actually starting the movie at the beginning as opposed to having 4 separate beginnings, the idea of actually having a core cast as opposed to having 2 separate casts, all the loose fluff, like the idea of everything that was going on in Corellia in the first few scenes is cut entirely because it adds nothing to the movie if we cut out Kira. It adds nothing to the movie if we add this, because again, and Kira was cut because Kira's just basically Diet Leia. We as the audience don't actually care if Han gets back to Kira. We as the audience could not care less if Kira lives or dies. And of course there's the issue with Crimson Dawn and the Solo cameo, which was Darth Maul. But listen, Darth Maul added nothing to the movie. It was simply a wink at the camera again, like a lot of Solo was. It was just a reference, like, hey, look, Darth Maul's in this movie. That means it's good, right? And I'm just cutting that because ultimately it's not needed. What we have is a simpler but a much more effective movie in my opinion. It's got its antagonist. It has its core cast. It has an actual plot that begins where it actually begins and moves on throughout the movie in a pretty typical 3-act structure. It leaves it open for sequels, I don't know. Hey, y'all let me know. If you want me to make a Solo 2, how I would write it based off of this, then, comment below. I would actually be kind of interested to do that. But, that's all I've got. Hopefully you've enjoyed this rewrite. Thanks for watching, and as always, I'll see you again next time.